fear of criticism is huge because of what you've gone through in the past, then that's going to make it really hard to do that. So sometimes we have to work through that fear of being criticized. And some of that is a fear of being seen, which is even deeper. That fear of being seen is real, especially if we've been masking a lot and flying under the radar. And now all of a sudden, especially if you hit perimenopause and you're like, I don't even know if I can mask anymore. Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self-Loved Woman Podcast. Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're going to talk about the ways we hide as ADHD women entrepreneurs. And there's lots of ways we do it. And most of the time it's subconscious. So it's not like we're doing it on purpose. And our ADHD certainly doesn't help. Today, we're going to talk about those different things. So working with a lot of women with ADHD, many who are self-employed and some starting new businesses, I've noticed a common thread that I notice in myself sometimes, and especially noticed when I was getting started. And it's that we find lots and lots of ways to procrastinate. And I'm not saying, oh, you know what? You have ADHD. You should never procrastinate. Because don't get me wrong. I get it. But do we ever wonder why or how? Because sometimes procrastination can be sneaky, right? Sometimes it's obvious. Oh, hey, I'm going to scroll social media and watch a bunch of TikToks, or I'm going to binge Netflix. That's more obvious procrastination, but there's a lot of less obvious ways that we hide and keep ourselves from doing the things that make our businesses be successful. So I want to share some of those ways today. But first I want to say we come by this honestly, right? Like we're just trying to get by with our ADHD. And I think there's some underlying reasons why these come up, and I'll get to those later. But first I want to start by sharing some of what I notice in others as well as my own self when I do notice myself procrastinating or not doing the tasks that need to be done. The first one that comes up for me is complexity. So I will make things a million times harder than they have to be. And it's, oh, nope, I got to do this and I got to do that. I'm trying to think of, I launched a webinar a while back in January, and it was like, oh, I've got to have all this stuff, and it's got to be on Eventbrite, and it's got to be this big deal, and I've got to have all this other stuff. Like it was just like, oh, and I should have this extra tool that I'm going to buy to remind people over and above Eventbrite. And I was making it all these extra steps. And we know with ADHD, the steps we have are already enough. It's like, okay. And so a lot of times when we add all those extra steps, it makes things more complex. If we are able to get it done, then we end up, it's not like our best work, which I hate even saying that because I don't know, hearing that word, those are like triggering back to grade school, right? It's not your best work. But in a lot of ways, there's some truth to that when we are making things overly complex, it makes it very hard for our ADHD or with ADHD to be able to actually get the stuff done. Because now there's too many steps, too many details, and we tend to miss those kind of things. So instead, we want to work on simplifying. Like, what's the easiest way to do this? What's not the half-ass way? I'm not talking about that, but what's simple? What is a simple approach? I have a entrepreneur friend who I was amazed by her because when she did her launch, she didn't have Kajabi, the course hosting platform. She didn't have any of that stuff. She didn't have this big email like MailChimp or Constant Contact or anything. She was just like, yeah, I'm going to put it on Eventbrite, let that market it. I'll have one single landing page versus this huge website that I thought I had to develop first. It was just listening to her and I was like, wow, that's amazing. And watching that was part of what helped me realize, oh, okay, one way I hide or avoid or procrastinate is through complexity. And as I've talked about this with other female ADHDers, especially entrepreneurs, they're like, oh yeah, totally, I do that. So that's a first really big one. Another one is overwhelm. Now, I'm not saying feeling stressed isn't valid. And I'm not saying that like our feelings are invalid, because you know what? If you're feeling overwhelmed, that's true. And I also notice a tendency just to be like, oh my gosh, I've got all these things and whatever. And I noticed a little bit of that myself this morning getting ready to record this podcast. So I was like, oh, but I got to do this and I got to do this. And I was running around and spinning into overwhelm. And I've learned over time to not let that overwhelm dominate my life or keep me from doing things. Instead of noticing it as what needs to control my life, I notice it as a symptom of what's going on with me. And there's ways that we do that. I love teaching that to clients, but to basically the most important piece is to notice, like when we're doing that, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed, I can't do it. That's like, oh, hey, what's going on? That's a call to look deeper, right? That's a call to stop the madness, to slow our roll. I sat down today and I wrote down all the things that I was like, okay, what's all the stuff spinning in my head? And I just free wrote it all down, like just got it out of my brain. So it's not swirling up here. And then I did some other things. Like I went for a little tiny walk. And of course I did my morning routine, like meditating and stuff, and exercise. But that, if we can notice when we're in that place of overwhelm and then get curious about it, not shaming ourselves for it, but get curious, then we can actually do something with it and help us to be able to function and get whatever we need to get done, right? Sometimes when we're procrastinating, there's a valid reason why. And we can talk about that more later, but it's not necessarily like bad. It's more of a time for curiosity when we notice that. Yeah. All right. So another way that we do this is we take ineffective action. And so there are certain things that will help our business thrive. There are certain tasks that will help our business thrive. And there's other stuff that maybe helps a little, but not as much, right? And when we're procrastinating or there's something like we're not ready, we feel not ready, which is usually what's beneath procrastination and something we need to work with. One of the ways that this shows up is we focus on the stuff that's not actually going to bring revenue into our business, right? Like in my private practice, calling insurance companies is like, was the bane of my existence. And now I have a biller that does that for me. And that is a money-making activity, because if there are claims that have been denied that shouldn't have been denied, me calling them and getting it straightened out is a money-making activity. And yet I will do all kinds of other stuff. I'm like, oh, I should probably update my website right now. I don't really like the about me section, or right. Or, ooh, I should make a post for social media. That would be a good idea. And then I'll scroll social media for a while to get ideas. I don't know about you, but I convince myself that is an important thing to do, that updating my about me is essential in that moment. And sure, maybe that helps, but when you're trying to bring enough revenue in to support yourself and you're not where you want to be and you want to help more people than you're able to help right now, then maybe your about me page on your website isn't a top priority. Yeah. Do you ever catch yourself doing this? I'd love to hear the comments. So make sure you comment if you catch yourself doing this one. Another thing I catch myself doing is having to be the absolute expert. Right. And I did this a lot in my therapy practice. I still do it now sometimes in my ADHD coaching business, where I'm like, oh, you know what? I better take another training because I don't feel like I quite know everything there is to know. And don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting we don't get trained on the things we need to get trained in. I'm certainly very well trained. And I think there's some time when there was some overkill. Right? It's okay. Probably I don't need to take 4 coaching classes, or probably I don't need to know how to do 3 trauma modalities, although it does serve my clients well because then they have more of a choice. But sometimes, or maybe let me back up. Another thing is maybe I need to take 6 courses on how to run my business, right? Or another one, or that one didn't work. What's another one I can do? So That can be really helpful to catch ourselves doing that pattern. Anytime I catch myself seeing a course come through, I'm like, okay, how would this help me? What would this give me that I don't already have? Is this a distraction I'm using to do the stuff that's uncomfortable or that I'm scared of or whatever? Or is this legitimately something that needs to happen for me in my business right now? It's an important question because a lot of times we keep just staying in that learning phase. Don't get me wrong, learning and growth are like, that's one of my top 3 values. And I think we can sometimes use it as a distraction when we're procrastinating. Oh, I don't quite know enough yet. Instead of trusting our inner expert and sitting in silence and listening to our highest self and speaking from that place of inner wisdom, which is even deeper than any knowledge we could get from reading a book or something like that. Oh, yeah, that's the other thing, books. I better read that book. I better read that book. Anyone else? Totally. So another thing that we do, I don't know if you do this, but I catch myself doing it, is research rabbit holes. Rabbit holes are a way I hear lots and lots of my clients procrastinating or putting off the important work that needs to be done. And this is closely related to the last one of needing to be the expert. But if you're finding yourself reading a gazillion articles on one topic, then probably that's too many. And probably even more than 3 is, unless you didn't find what you needed in the first 1 or 2. And it's not that we don't want to keep learning and growing and know what we're talking about and be in a place of expert. But a lot of times our mastery, our sense of expert comes from our lived experiences and how we've already helped people, as well as how we've helped ourselves. If you catch yourself doing that, where you're like, okay, I'm going to research this more, I'm going to research this more, then you just might be in a phase of procrastination. Again, I'm not saying procrastination is bad, but it does keep us from doing the stuff that we need to do. So those are just a few of the things that help us procrastinate, or that are things that we do subconsciously to put off doing the work we need to do for our business, the work that would help us reach more people so we can help more people, the work that would bring in more revenue, the work that might actually make our business be more satisfying rather than the struggle of doing the little admin tasks. Anyone else? So here's the thing. What do we do about it? What do we do about it? The first thing I recommend doing, and I think this is the most important step, and it's one that a lot of us skip, and it's not shaming yourself about it, by the way, which is what everyone else did to us when we were procrastinating, and probably we learned to do to ourselves. The first step is noticing one of these patterns, and you might have other ones, but the first step is noticing that you're doing one of these things and being like, oh, I am procrastinating right now. And then to lean in and get really curious. For me, that means writing. For some people, it means sitting in the silence. And there's lots of ways to do that. Some people are really verbal processors. I'm a verbal processor too, though. But I tend to find for this kind of stuff, I do better if I'm writing or sitting in silence, because then those deeper things come up. Although sometimes talking to others can help too, especially if it's like a therapist or other people working on the same stuff. What I found doesn't help is talking to other people who don't have ADHD and also people who aren't entrepreneurs. Not that they can't be supportive, but a lot of times they don't really understand what it takes to be an entrepreneur, and especially one with ADHD. And so we can talk to them about all kinds of other things and get support for other things. Sometimes they don't offer the best support around this. Sometimes they do. I'm not criticizing anyone in anyone's family or friend circle or your therapist or anything, but sometimes it helps if we can really talk to each other if you're choosing to verbally process. So those are some ways to start to understand what's going on. And then when we do that, it's helpful. So those are some ways to help you figure out what's really going on. And I suspect that on some level, what's beneath all this is fear. And I notice a lot of different fears. Some I see in myself, some I see in my clients. One is the big obvious one, right? Like fear of failure. Certainly people with ADHD are no strangers to failure. I mean, even I'm a high achiever and I've had my fair share. So certainly a fear of failure is common. I think another common one is fear of judgment and criticism. And especially if you've had undiagnosed ADHD, or even if your ADHD was diagnosed in childhood, we're used to people being very critical of the way our ADHD shows up in the world unless we're heavily masked. People get incredibly frustrated when we're impulsive or struggle to focus or are sometimes disorganized or maybe all the time disorganized or can't find something, misplace something, whatever. The list goes on. And so starting from our youth, maybe we got yelled at for those things, perhaps shamed for them. And so now that's like our go-to. Like we're like, oh my God, I don't want people to judge me. And when you own a business, especially if you own a digital business, but nowadays, I mean, everything is kind of an online business because even if you have a mom and pop shop or you are like in private practice like me, that's one of my businesses, you're still online. And you're still, because to get people into your business, you have to do some kind of marketing. And that involves putting yourself out there. And if that fear of criticism is huge because of what you've gone through in the past, then that's going to make it really hard to do that. So sometimes we have to work through that fear of being criticized. And some of that is a fear of being seen, which is even deeper. That fear of being seen is real, especially if we've been masking a lot and flying under the radar. And now all of a sudden, especially if you hit perimenopause and you're like, I don't even know if I can mask anymore. But, maybe, I'm not suggesting masking is a fantastic strategy 100% of the time. I will say there are times when it has helped me be able to function. But also, if you masked a lot or didn't mask a lot as a kid, you probably got a lot more criticism, which I think is why a lot of us learn to mask, but that's just my thought. Another thing that's really common, and this one snuck up on me when I started noticing it with myself, is a fear of success. And what I notice is that success means a couple of things. One, success means we could disappoint people. If we have clients, we could disappoint them, or they could get mad at us, or we could have conflict. Or if we have a big social media following, if that's one of your goals, you will have haters. Like there's going to be people who say mean crap to you. And some of it is legitimate feedback or just poorly worded or violently worded, whatever word you want to use there. But violent is a strong word. Maybe aggressively worded is better. Either way, sometimes those comments are like, oh yeah, this is an area I didn't explain well. But sometimes there are just trolls and they just say stuff just to like mess with you. And so some of being successful and having more reach and having more exposure means you're more open to people judging you and criticizing you and being mean to you. And so that fear of success is real because then you're going to be even more seen and you might disappoint people. The other piece I think that can show up as fear of success is when you have success, whatever that means to you, like maybe you have more clients because your goal is to reach more people, right? Because most of us are in business to help others in some way. And our goal is to meet more, or reach more people to help them. So success means having more clients, but more clients equals more work. And if you're already feeling overloaded and you're like, I can barely keep my head above water now, there may be some underlying pieces that are like, we don't really want to grow our business because then we couldn't handle it. So I think that's an important one to check out. So today we talked about the different ways we procrastinate, and that procrastination is not necessarily bad, but it is something to get curious about so we can understand what it's about. I want to add one more thing as we're closing here, and it's that procrastination sometimes is because the task we're procrastinating isn't actually something we need to do. And whether it doesn't need to be done at all, it can be deleted, or it needs to be delegated. So for me, I would procrastinate calling insurance companies. And finally, my electronic health record had this awesome offer. They're trying out billing services. And so they were giving discounts. So I was like, I'm in, because that is just something I can't get myself to do. And it's not positive. I won't unpack that here. But when we delegate sometimes, or when we're procrastinating, sometimes it means that we need to delegate, or sometimes it's a task that just doesn't need to be done. All right, y'all. So we've considered the different ways that we procrastinate or keep ourselves from doing stuff. And I hope that you've learned that when we notice that, that's not the time to shame ourselves or be like, oh, I'm procrastinating, or, oh, it's my ADHD, I just can't do it. But rather lean in and get curious and think like, what's that about? And for you, it may be about some of the things that we covered today, and it may be about something else. So I really recommend that you take the time to sit in the silence or write or whatever it is that you do to truly understand what's going on for you. All right, y'all, please share this podcast. Make sure you follow if you're not following. And I'd love for you to leave a comment or a review. So take care.